If you think real strength belongs to the loudest person in the park, wait until you meet the quiet old man everyone underestimated. The live stream had already attracted thousands of viewers before anyone stopped to ask whether what they were watching was right. A shaky phone camera swept across the walking trail of Lincoln Park on a bright Saturday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina. Children laughed near the playground. Joggers passed beneath towering oak trees. A fountain sparkled beneath the warm sunlight. Everything looked peaceful until the camera stopped on one lonely figure. Samuel Brooks walked slowly along the brick path with a weathered wooden cane in one hand and a folded paper bag in the other. At 74 years old, every careful step reflected decades of living rather than weakness. His gray jacket had been patched more than once. His baseball cap had faded under countless summers. His shoes had seen better years, but they were polished with quiet pride. He looked like someone the world had forgotten. 3 white teenagers noticed him almost immediately. They weren't there for fresh air or exercise. Their phones were already recording before they ever crossed his path. They had built a reputation online by embarrassing strangers, turning ordinary people into viral entertainment. Every laugh, every awkward reaction, every uncomfortable moment translated into more followers, more comments, more attention. Today, they believed they had found the perfect target. Ethan Miller stepped into Samuel's path first, wearing the confident smile of someone who had never expected consequences. Tyler Reed circled to the side, while Logan Hayes kept the live stream focused on the elderly man. Bright messages raced across the screen. "This is gonna be hilarious. Old dude looks scared already. Keep filming." Samuel stopped walking. His calm brown eyes moved from one young face to another before resting briefly on the phone pointed toward him. He didn't appear angry. He didn't appear frightened. Instead, he simply waited, as though giving them every opportunity to remember the manners someone should have taught them years ago. Ethan flashed a grin toward the camera before speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Hey, old man. Smile for the internet." Several people turned their heads but continued walking, unwilling to become involved. A young couple slowed for only a moment before moving on. An elderly woman tightened her grip on her grocery bag and quietly crossed to the opposite side of the path. Even the pigeons fluttered away from the growing tension. Samuel answered with a gentle voice that barely rose above the breeze. "Young man, I just want to enjoy my walk." His words carried no anger, no bitterness, only quiet dignity. The response disappointed the teenagers. They had expected panic. They wanted outrage. Instead, they found patience, and patience never made exciting videos. Tyler laughed and stepped closer while Logan zoomed in on Samuel's face, searching for the reaction that would make millions click. None of them noticed the small black boy standing beside the fountain, clutching his backpack tightly as he watched every second unfold with wide, uncertain eyes. Samuel noticed him immediately, and in that silent moment, something deep inside the old man quietly awakened. Samuel had learned long ago that silence could reveal more about a person's character than an argument ever could. He stood perfectly still, his weathered hand resting lightly on the curved handle of his cane, while the afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass across the park. The paper bag in his other hand held nothing more than 2 small sandwiches and a bag of birdseed. Every Saturday for nearly 6 years, he followed the exact same routine. He would buy lunch from the neighborhood deli, feed the birds near the fountain, then spend an hour reading on the same green bench where he and his late wife, Eleanor, had once planned the rest of their lives. After she passed away, he never stopped coming. It was the only place where the silence still felt like a conversation instead of loneliness. Ethan glanced at the comments racing across the live stream and smiled wider with every new message. The viewer count climbed higher by the second. Strangers from across the country typed laughing emojis, daring the boys to keep going, treating another human being as nothing more than afternoon entertainment. Tyler nudged Logan with his elbow. "This is blowing up," he whispered with excitement. Logan adjusted the phone to keep Samuel centered on the screen. "Do not lose the shot," he answered quietly. "People love this stuff." Samuel listened without responding. He had seen enough years to understand that attention was often mistaken for importance. The loudest voices usually disappeared first when life became difficult. Across the path, the little boy still had not moved. He could not have been older than 9. His oversized backpack nearly reached the backs of his knees, and his eyes remained fixed on Samuel with an expression that mixed fear, confusion, and hope. Samuel recognized that look immediately because he had worn it himself many decades earlier. He remembered being a young black boy in Georgia during a very different America, watching his own grandfather choose dignity over anger when others tried to make him feel small. His grandfather had once leaned down and whispered, "People will always remember how you carried yourself after they forget what was said." Those words had followed Samuel through every chapter of his life. They had carried him through hardship, through loss, through moments when giving in to anger would have been easier than choosing patience. He quietly inhaled, letting the cool autumn air settle his heartbeat. The years had slowed his walk, but never his mind. Every movement around him registered with remarkable clarity. The jogger tying his shoe 20 feet away. The park maintenance truck humming in the distance. The fountain splashing against polished stone. The faint whistle of a passing train somewhere beyond the trees. Even the smallest details still mattered to him because discipline had never been something he practiced only in difficult moments. It had become part of who he was. Ethan stepped even closer until only a few feet separated them. "What is the matter?" he asked with a mocking grin. "Cat got your tongue?" Samuel finally looked directly into the young man's eyes. There was no resentment in his expression, only a quiet sadness that seemed far older than the wrinkles on his face. "Son," he said softly, "every choice you make today is becoming part of the man you will be tomorrow." For the first time since the live stream began, the comment section slowed, as though thousands of strangers had paused together without even realizing why. The words settled over the park more heavily than anyone expected. Ethan forced out a laugh, but it sounded thinner now, almost rehearsed. Tyler glanced at the scrolling comments again, expecting endless applause, yet something had shifted. Mixed among the jokes were new messages asking why they were bothering an old man who had done nothing wrong. Logan frowned at the screen and quickly adjusted the camera angle, hoping to steer the audience back toward the entertainment they had promised. Numbers continued climbing, but the mood no longer belonged entirely to them. Samuel bent slowly and picked up the paper bag that had slipped onto the bench beside him. He carefully brushed away a few tiny leaves before checking that the bag of birdseed had not torn. The simple gesture puzzled the teenagers. He cared more about feeding birds than defending himself. It made no sense to them. Samuel walked a few quiet steps toward the fountain, moving with measured patience rather than fear. The three boys followed close behind, determined not to lose control of the moment they believed belonged to them. Around the fountain, pigeons gathered expectantly, recognizing the familiar visitor who never failed to appear each Saturday. Samuel smiled gently for the first time that afternoon. He reached into the paper bag and scattered a handful of seed across the stone walkway. Within seconds, dozens of birds fluttered down around his feet, filling the air with the soft sound of wings instead of angry voices. Even several people who had been preparing to leave stopped to watch the peaceful scene unfold. The little boy by the fountain took one cautious step closer, curiosity beginning to replace fear. Samuel noticed him again and offered the child a warm smile before extending the paper bag. "Would you like to help?" he asked quietly. The boy hesitated only for a moment before nodding. He walked forward carefully, accepted a small handful of birdseed, and tossed it onto the ground with an uncertain laugh as more pigeons gathered around them. For a brief moment, the tension seemed to disappear beneath the fluttering wings and afternoon sunlight. Ethan rolled his eyes toward the camera. "Seriously? We are feeding birds now," he muttered. He expected the viewers to laugh with him, but the comment section surprised him again. Thousands of strangers were no longer reacting to Samuel. They were reacting to the little boy whose nervous smile had appeared for the first time since the live stream began. Messages filled the screen. "Protect that kid. The old man seems kinder than all three of you. Leave him alone." Logan quietly swallowed. The tone of the audience was changing faster than he could control. Tyler kicked lightly at a loose pebble near the path, trying to recover the attention they had started with. "You really think acting nice makes you special?" he asked. Samuel looked toward the fountain where sunlight shimmered across the moving water. "No," he answered calmly. "Kindness is not special. It is simply becoming rare." Those words lingered in the crisp afternoon air. An older couple sitting nearby exchanged silent glances. A young mother lowered her phone instead of recording. The park itself seemed to grow quieter, as though everyone present sensed they were witnessing something far more meaningful than another viral prank. Then, from across the walking trail, an elderly jogger slowed to a complete stop. His eyes remained fixed on Samuel's relaxed posture, the balanced way he stood, and the calm precision of every movement. Recognition slowly spread across his face, followed by disbelief. He removed his running cap, stared a little longer, and whispered almost to himself, "That cannot be Samuel Brooks, can it?" The jogger took another slow step forward, never taking his eyes off the elderly man beside the fountain. His breathing grew uneven, not from the morning run but from a memory he had buried nearly 40 years earlier. He looked at Samuel's feet first, balanced, relaxed, always ready without appearing tense. Then he noticed the way Samuel shifted his weight almost invisibly whenever someone moved closer, as natural as breathing, as if every inch of space around him had its own purpose. The old runner quietly shook his head. "No, it really is him," he murmured. A nearby woman overheard him and frowned with curiosity. "Do you know him?" she asked. The jogger nodded slowly. "When I was a teenager, my father drove me 300 miles just so I could watch him fight for the national title. He was one of the smartest boxers I have ever seen. He barely got hit because he never wasted a movement." The woman looked back towards Samuel with new eyes. There was nothing flashy about him now. No championship belt. No cheering crowd. Just an elderly man feeding birds beside a little boy. Yet somehow the quiet dignity surrounding him suddenly made perfect sense. Logan accidentally caught the conversation through the live stream microphone. The comments exploded again, but this time the tone was completely different. "Wait, what did that man just say? Search his name. Former champion? There is no way." Tyler frowned at the screen, annoyed that the attention was slipping away from the prank itself. Ethan folded his arms confidently. "Everybody relax," he said loudly enough for both the crowd and the live stream. Even if he used to be somebody, that was a long time ago. Samuel remained focused on the little boy, helping him scatter another handful of birdseed across the pavement. The child smiled more naturally now, laughing softly as pigeons hurried toward them. Samuel spoke without looking at Ethan. "Some victories do not fade with time." Ethan smirked. "You talking about trophies?" Samuel gently shook his head. "No. Character." The single word landed with surprising weight. Several people standing nearby lowered their phones. Others who had quietly watched from a distance now drifted closer, not because they expected conflict, but because they sensed they were witnessing something worth remembering. The livestream audience continued growing, yet the comments no longer encouraged humiliation. Instead, strangers urged the boys to walk away, while others searched old sports archives, posting faded photographs and newspaper headlines. Logan's expression changed as he read them. Grainy images showed a much younger Samuel standing beneath bright arena lights with championship gloves raised high above his head. Another article praised him not only for winning titles, but for mentoring children after retirement. A third described how he had quietly donated prize money to neighborhood youth programs instead of buying luxury cars. Logan looked up from the phone, then back at the elderly man only a few yards away. The figure before him no longer matched the harmless stranger they had chosen for easy entertainment. Samuel finally turned toward the three teenagers again. His expression remained calm, almost compassionate. "Young men," he said, "the internet will remember this afternoon for a few days. You will remember the choices you make here for the rest of your lives." Silence settled across the fountain once more. Even the birds seemed to pause between gentle wing beats. Then the little boy looked up at Samuel with complete admiration and asked the question everyone listening suddenly wanted answered. "Mister, were you really a champion?" The little boy's question floated through the afternoon air with a sincerity that silenced every whisper around the fountain. Samuel looked down at him and smiled with gentle warmth. "A long time ago," he answered. "But the medals were never the important part." The child tilted his head in confusion. "Then what was?" Samuel brushed a few remaining birdseeds from his hand before replying. "Learning that the strongest people are the ones who never forget how to care for others." The boy nodded slowly, trying to understand words that carried more weight than he had yet experienced in life. Around them, more phones lowered instead of rising. The crowd was no longer waiting for something embarrassing to happen. They were listening. Logan stared at the stream of comments flooding his screen. Thousands of viewers had begun posting links to old championship footage, newspaper clippings, and interviews from decades earlier. One comment stood out above the rest. "My grandfather trained with Samuel Brooks. He always said, the man never started fights. He only finished fear." Logan quietly read the sentence twice. Ethan reached over his shoulder, saw the message, and immediately scoffed. "People believe anything they read online," he said, trying to recover his confidence. Yet his voice lacked the certainty it carried only minutes before. Tyler crossed his arms and glanced uneasily toward the gathering crowd. More park visitors had stopped walking. An elderly veteran wearing a faded service cap approached slowly, studying Samuel with unmistakable recognition. Without saying a word, he removed his cap and gave Samuel a respectful nod. Samuel returned the gesture with the same quiet dignity. Nothing more needed to be said between two men who understood respect without demanding attention. The simple exchange spoke louder than any introduction. Ethan noticed it, and for the first time that afternoon, uncertainty crept into his expression. He had expected laughter, not admiration. He had expected an audience cheering him on, not strangers looking at him with disappointment. His eyes wandered toward the little boy still standing beside Samuel. The child no longer looked frightened. Instead, he stood taller somehow, watching the elderly man with complete trust. That change unsettled Ethan more than any comment on the livestream. Samuel reached into his jacket pocket and carefully unfolded a worn photograph whose edges had softened with age. It showed a much younger version of himself standing beside Eleanor, both of them smiling beneath bright arena lights. He looked at the picture for only a second before handing it to the little boy. "That was the happiest night of my career," Samuel said quietly. The child looked at the championship belt draped across Samuel's younger shoulders. "Because you won?" Samuel gently shook his head. "Because she reminded me that tomorrow morning I would still have to choose what kind of man I wanted to be." The boy looked at Eleanor's smiling face and then back at Samuel with growing admiration. The jogger standing nearby quietly wiped moisture from the corner of his eye. He remembered hearing the same words in an interview nearly 40 years earlier, when reporters had asked Samuel what victory meant. He had answered exactly the same way then. Success had never changed him. Time had not changed him either. Logan slowly lowered his phone until the livestream camera pointed toward the ground. Nobody told him to stop recording. He simply no longer felt comfortable turning another person's dignity into entertainment. The comments reflected the same transformation. "Leave the man alone. He already taught them something. This is not about boxing anymore." Ethan noticed Logan lowering the phone and reached toward it instinctively. But before he could say anything, a calm voice from somewhere behind the growing crowd broke the silence. "I have been watching from the beginning," the newcomer said. "And I believe every young person here deserves to know exactly who Samuel Brooks became after he walked away from the spotlight." The voice belonged to an older man wearing a navy windbreaker with the faded logo of the Charlotte Youth Boxing Association stitched above the pocket. His silver hair peeked out beneath a weathered cap, and the moment Samuel saw him, a quiet smile crossed his face. "Coach Harris," Samuel said softly. The man smiled back. "You still remember me?" Samuel nodded. "You were impossible to forget." Coach Harris stepped beside Samuel and looked toward the three teenagers, then at the growing crowd surrounding the fountain. "Most people remember the championship belts," he began calmly. "I remember what happened after the cameras were turned off." Every conversation in the park faded into silence. Even Logan instinctively raised the phone again, not to embarrass anyone, but because he suddenly felt that whatever came next deserved to be heard. Coach Harris folded his hands behind his back. After Samuel retired, sponsors offered him television contracts, speaking tours, and endorsement deals worth more money than most people could imagine. He thanked every one of them, and turned almost all of them down. Ethan frowned with genuine confusion. Why would anybody do that? Coach Harris looked at Samuel before answering. Because he believed children needed mentors more than the world needed another celebrity. The little boy beside Samuel looked up with wide eyes. "You became a teacher?" Samuel chuckled quietly. "Something like that." Coach Harris continued. "For more than 20 years, he opened his gym before sunrise. Kids who could not afford lessons never paid $1. If they were hungry, he fed them breakfast before training. If they struggled in school, Nobody touched a pair of gloves until homework was finished. Some of those children became champions. Most did not. Samuel never cared which happened. The words spread through the crowd like ripples across the fountain. Several parents exchanged thoughtful glances. One young father quietly placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, holding her a little closer. Logan stared at Samuel with growing disbelief. Everything he had expected from a famous athlete had been replaced by something much harder to understand. There was no arrogance, no desire for attention, no attempt to prove anyone wrong. Samuel simply stood there as birds continued pecking peacefully at the scattered seeds around his polished shoes. Coach Harris reached into his wallet and removed an old photograph, protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. It showed dozens of children standing inside a modest boxing gym, smiling beside Samuel. Some wore oversized gloves. Others held school report cards instead of trophies. Coach Harris handed the picture to the little boy. Every child in that photograph came from a difficult situation, he said. Samuel told them that boxing was never about learning how to hurt people. It was about learning how to control yourself when life tempted you to become someone you were never meant to be. The little boy studied the smiling faces one by one before carefully giving the photograph back. Ethan looked down at the ground. Tyler stopped checking the live stream entirely. For the first time all afternoon, none of the three teenagers seemed interested in entertaining strangers online. The sunlight drifted lower across the park, bathing the fountain in warm, golden reflections. Samuel quietly picked up the nearly empty paper bag and folded it neatly beneath his arm. "Coach," he said with a gentle smile, "those children taught me far more than I ever taught them." Coach Harris laughed softly. "That is exactly why they still come back to visit you." Before anyone could respond, a familiar voice called from the far end of the walking trail. "Grandpa." A young woman hurried toward the fountain carrying a gym bag over one shoulder, and several people immediately recognized her face from recent national amateur boxing championships. The expressions around the park changed once again as everyone realized Samuel Brooks' greatest legacy had never been locked away in a trophy case. Emily Brooks reached her grandfather with an easy smile that instantly softened his tired eyes. She looked to be in her late 20s, dressed in simple training clothes with a duffel bag resting over one shoulder. Before saying anything else, she wrapped Samuel in a careful hug that carried years of affection rather than ceremony. "I hope I did not keep you waiting too long," she said. Samuel chuckled. "You are right on time, just like your grandmother always was." Emily laughed quietly before noticing the unusual crowd surrounding the fountain. Her smile faded slightly as she glanced from the lowered phones to the uneasy expressions on the three teenagers standing only a few feet away. Coach Harris greeted her warmly. "Still training 6 days a week?" Emily nodded. "Every chance I get." The little boy tugged gently on Samuel's sleeve. "Is she a boxer too?" Samuel smiled with unmistakable pride. "She is much better than I ever was at listening." Emily laughed and shook her head. "Grandpa still refuses to answer simple questions." Coach Harris folded his arms with a grin. "Then I will answer it. Emily Brooks is the current national amateur champion in her division. But if you ask her what matters most, she will tell you about the youth classes she teaches every Tuesday evening." Emily looked slightly embarrassed. "Grandpa started that program. I only continue what he built." The livestream comments erupted once again, but this time they were filled with admiration instead of mockery. Viewers posted clips from Emily's recent championship matches alongside interviews, where she repeatedly thanked her grandfather for teaching her discipline before technique and kindness before victory. Logan quietly read every message, his face growing paler with each passing second. Ethan no longer tried to entertain the audience. Instead, he stared at Samuel with the uncomfortable realization that every assumption he had made that afternoon had been completely wrong. Tyler slowly slipped his phone into his pocket without a word. Emily noticed their expressions and looked towards Samuel with quiet concern. "Grandpa, did something happen?" Before Samuel could answer, the little boy spoke first. They wanted people to laugh at him. His innocent voice carried across the silent park with surprising weight. Emily glanced at the teenagers, but there was no anger in her face. Instead, there was disappointment, the kind that asked people to become better instead of making them feel smaller. Samuel gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It is all right," he said. "Everybody has a day that teaches them something important." Ethan lowered his eyes. Nobody had ever answered embarrassment with compassion before. He had prepared himself for an argument, for accusations, even for someone to humiliate him in return. Instead, the elderly man he had underestimated offered calm words that somehow felt heavier than punishment. Coach Harris quietly looked toward the growing crowd. Do you know why Samuel never lost respect after he retired? Nobody answered. The coach smiled gently. Because he never believed the purpose of strength was to stand above other people. He believed its purpose was to help someone else stand beside you. Those words settled over the park as softly as the evening sunlight reflecting across the fountain. The little boy looked from Samuel to Emily, then back again, as if discovering an entirely different definition of what a champion could be. Even the strangers who had gathered to watch found themselves lowering their phones completely. Then Samuel slowly turned toward Ethan, Tyler, and Logan with the same peaceful expression he had worn since the beginning of the afternoon, and asked a question so unexpected that it left every person listening completely speechless. Would the three of you like to walk with us to the gym? For several long seconds, nobody moved. The invitation seemed almost impossible to understand. Ethan looked at Samuel as though he had misheard him. You want us to come with you? He asked quietly. Samuel nodded once. Only if you are willing to learn something that has nothing to do with winning a fight. The words carried no sarcasm, no hidden judgment, only an open door. Tyler shifted uneasily, his hands buried deep inside his pockets. He had expected the afternoon to end with public embarrassment, maybe even police officers asking questions after the live stream spread across social media. Instead, the man they had tried to ridicule was offering them time, patience, and another chance. Logan looked down at the phone still resting in his hand. The live stream remained active, but the comments had transformed completely. Thousands of strangers who had first arrived looking for cheap entertainment were now urging the boys to accept the invitation. One message appeared again and again from viewers across the country. Do not waste this opportunity. Logan slowly pressed the button to end the broadcast. The screen went dark. For the first time in months, silence felt better than another notification. Emily watched the three teenagers carefully before smiling. Our gym is not fancy, she said. The paint is old. Some of the equipment has been repaired more times than replaced. But everyone who walks through the front door is treated the same. The little boy standing beside Samuel looked up with excitement. Can I come too? Samuel smiled warmly. Of course. There is always room for one more. The child's face brightened instantly. His earlier fear had disappeared so completely that it almost felt like watching the sun emerge after heavy clouds. Coach Harris laughed softly. That is exactly how news stories begin, he said. Ethan finally lifted his eyes toward Samuel. His confident smile from earlier had vanished, replaced by something far more honest. I owe you an apology, he admitted quietly. Samuel gently shook his head. An apology matters only if it changes tomorrow. Ethan absorbed those words without answering. They settled somewhere much deeper than simple embarrassment. Tyler took one slow step forward. If we come, do we have to know anything about boxing? Emily smiled. Only how to listen. Even Logan managed a nervous laugh. The tension that had filled the park all afternoon gradually dissolved into something lighter. Nearby, several strangers quietly applauded, not because anyone had won or lost, but because they had witnessed people choosing understanding over pride. The elderly veteran who had saluted Samuel earlier walked over and extended his hand toward Ethan. Son, he said kindly, every man remembers the day somebody believed he could become better. Ethan accepted the handshake with visible humility. Samuel reached into the nearly empty paper bag and discovered one last handful of birdseed. Without saying a word, he poured half into the little boy's hand and offered the other half to Ethan. The teenager looked surprised. Me? Samuel nodded. The birds do not care what happened 10 minutes ago. They only respond to what you do now. Ethan slowly scattered the seed across the pavement beside the child. Within moments, pigeons gathered peacefully around both of them without hesitation or fear. The little boy laughed, and after a brief pause, Ethan found himself laughing too. Coach Harris quietly watched the scene with folded arms. That, he whispered, is what real victory looks like. Samuel picked up his cane, adjusted his faded cap against the gentle afternoon breeze, and started walking toward the park entrance at his familiar steady pace. Emily fell into step beside him. The little boy hurried after them. Then, after exchanging uncertain glances with one another, Ethan, Tyler, and Logan followed without being asked again, leaving behind the place where they had come searching for attention and walking instead towards something none of them had expected to find, a chance to become different men. 1 month later, the park looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. The fountain still shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. The pigeons still gathered along the familiar brick path. Children still laughed near the playground, and joggers still passed beneath the old oak trees. But every Saturday, a different group now walked beside Samuel Brooks. Ethan, Tyler, and Logan arrived carrying small bags of birdseed instead of phones held high for strangers. They greeted the park regulars by name, smiled at people they once would have ignored, and without being asked, they helped older visitors carry groceries or fold wheelchairs into waiting cars. No cameras followed them anymore. They had quietly discovered that some of the most important moments in life were never meant to be uploaded. Inside the modest boxing gym a few blocks away, fresh sounds filled the air every Tuesday evening. Jump ropes tapped gently against the floor. Heavy bags swayed in steady rhythm. Children laughed as Emily demonstrated footwork with patient encouragement instead of harsh commands. Along one wall hung faded photographs of champions from another era, but the newest pictures displayed something entirely different. They showed neighborhood children earning perfect attendance certificates, improving school grades, and volunteering together during community food drives. Samuel insisted those belonged beside the championship belts because, in his words, they represented victories that lasted much longer. The little boy from the park had become the first student to arrive every week. His confidence grew stronger with every class, not because he learned how to throw punches, but because someone believed his voice mattered. One afternoon, he stood before the entire group and read a school essay titled, "The Strongest Person I Ever Met." It was not about a famous athlete. It was not about a superhero. It was about an elderly man who fed birds before teaching children, who answered disrespect with patience, and who proved that courage could sound as gentle as a whisper. Samuel listened quietly from the back of the room, his eyes glistening as memories of Eleanor filled his heart. She had always believed that kindness spread farther than anger ever could. Watching the children laugh together, he realized she had been right all along. Ethan, Tyler, and Logan never forgot the afternoon that redirected their lives. They volunteered at the gym after school, helped younger children with homework before practice, and slowly earned back the trust they had once taken for granted. They learned that respect was never demanded. It was built one decision at a time. Coach Harris often watched them with quiet satisfaction, reminding every newcomer that true discipline began long before anyone stepped into a ring. One golden evening, as the final class ended, Samuel locked the gym door and walked toward the park with Emily beside him. The little boy raced ahead, scattering birdseed across the familiar pavement while pigeons fluttered happily around his feet. Ethan, Tyler, and Logan followed a few steps behind, laughing together as though they had always been friends. Samuel paused for a moment and looked toward the empty bench where he and Eleanor had once shared countless conversations. Warm sunlight reflected across the fountain, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead. He smiled softly, resting one hand upon his weathered cane before continuing down the path surrounded not by trophies, applause, or fame, but by people whose lives had quietly changed because one man chose compassion when he had every reason to choose something else. In the end, the greatest champion was never the one who defeated an opponent. It was the one who helped others discover the best version of themselves.